All right, let's take a call from Hadisoufi from North Carolina. Hello, can you hear us?
Hey, yeah, hey guys, how's it going?
It's going good. What can we help you with today?
Well, I'm a Muslim, and I've seen your show a couple of times, and I got to say I'm really impressed by the kind of attitude that you take to your faith. And I wanted to open with kind of an idea that occurred to me. So,
Okay.
as a person of faith and as a person who's really passionate about the sciences, I kind of see two ideas of God in the world. There's the kind of truly creative, omnipotent God that we theists kind of believe in, or at least us Abrahamic theists kind of believe in. And then there's
Sure.
more the sort of like living idea of God that actually exists in the world, that exists in the same way that democracy exists or, philosophy exists. And so, talking with my atheist friends, I kind of see why the idea of a truly omnipotent, unprovable God is unappealing. But for me, even if that wasn't the case, the kind of more functional day-to-day God still works for me. And that's kind of where I wanted to start off this conversation.
Interesting. Okay. So I've definitely given this some thought as well. The difference between an existent God, one that actually physically or, metaphysically exists, and then the one that is the concept of God, right? In the same way that we have a concept of Harry Potter or James T. Kirk, right? The character itself doesn't exist, but we couldn't deny that people know who this character is and have conversations, including the character and all of this. Is that kind of where you're going with this?
Exactly.
Okay. So I guess my first question to you would be, why would you value a conception of God if you don't necessarily, could you value the conception of God if you didn't believe that the true existing God existed? Like, where do you find that distinction?
That's a really tough question, honestly. And it's not something that I had considered, but just kind of going off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Being kind of part of an organized religion and engaging with God in that sense is a useful thing just by itself. It's a built-in community all the way around the world. It's, spiritual peace. It's, family. It's culture. It's heritage. All of these other good things that, that we all do appreciate about religion. And this might be getting a little bit abstract, but I do think that that sort of character of God does act in a way, right? Like in the same way that you can say that capitalism or perhaps democracy has real effects on the people who exist when they come into contact with those ideas, you can say that God does the same thing. That sort of living idea of God does the same thing. Am I making sense here, or am I like totally going crazy?
No, I think it's a good question to ask, and a good thesis to kind of start from. My counter would be, we all acknowledge that there is no democracy out there in some kind of metaphysical space watching us, right?
Yeah.
So like we when we talk about the existence of concepts like democracy, like any ism that exists, we are acknowledging that there isn't, for the most part, we're acknowledging that there isn't some personified version of that exists outside of us that is influencing our actions or expecting anything of us. So if I were to say that, sure, God conceptually exists, why would that have any bearing on whether or not God truly exists?
That's what I was
So
going
I
to say.
guess that for you, that's kind of the sticking point, right? I guess to me, it doesn't really matter if God, like as a creator, exists.
Ah,
Like
okay.
Oh,
he,
interesting.
if he does, he's so far removed, clearly, from day-to-day existence
I would
that,
agree with that.
you know, it might as well not be there at all. Or he acts in a way that's so mysterious that we can't properly perceive him. And that's pretty obvious. I mean, people have tried for millennia to objectively prove the existence of gods, and you know, seems like they've failed. So whether or not he's actually real seems to be kind of immaterial as much as practicing faith in him would. I'm kind of losing the words here, but do you see what I'm saying?
I think so. Neil, do you have something to say here?
It almost sounds to me like you're almost sitting on the fence nowadays about whether or not the existence of God is a thing. So where exactly are you on that point right now? Do you still consider yourself to be quite faithful and religious and stuff like that? Or are you kind of having questions these days?
No, I do. My family are Sufis, and as Sufis, we take not just the last name, but like literal Sufis.
Sure.
And we take a very mystical approach to God. You know, God is he's kind of an ever-present, all-powerful, all-existing being. You know, there's no separating us from God. We are him in a literal sense just as much as he's us, but we're kind of infinitely small parts of an infinitely large field that is God. You know, there's not, to conceive of God properly in his existence is impossible simply because we are such small echoes of his true being. So when I consider him in that way, it almost seems like there are more useful things that I could be doing with my time than wondering about his motivations and, you know, my place in the universe to him.
Sure. I agree.
Okay. Well, my question then is, what makes this conceptual God and religions based on the concept of God better than other concepts that bring people together in community across the world? So it seems to me like what you're saying is that a true God may exist, may not exist. That's not really important to the conversation. The conversation should be, is religion beneficial to humanity? Is the way that we conceptualize and bring about ideas of a deity or the supernatural, that is kind of where the important conversation lies. And your argument is that it is beneficial because of community, because of family, because of culture. But there are religions even that benefit people in those ways that don't rely on God belief, right? And there are communities that are built on holy material and non-mystical concepts as well. So I guess my question would be, what differentiates the benefits from believing in a conceptual God versus believing in something else that also provides these benefits?
Sure. Well, that's a great point, and thank you for taking the time to try and parse out what I'm saying. I know I can get kind of messy when I talk sometimes. So then
I think this is a good combo so far.
Me too. So I think that as a Muslim, it should be pretty obvious when I say that I feel like Islam is the best religion. And I say that not just because of, you know, the fact that these are my people. I was raised among Muslims. My family are all Muslims. I love them to death. You know,
Sure.
But this is also from what I've seen. When I try to step back a little bit and I look at the behavior of my people, I see that we behave in moral ways. I see that, you know, we do good works, that we are kind to one another and we care for one another. And when I've been to other communities, of course, you know, this is just me, right? This is all just anecdotes. I don't know if there is any objective way of measuring this stuff, but I see Muslims as some of the best people that I know. And so when I take that perspective, it seems like Islam is probably the best religion for me and just generally, in my opinion. So that's kind of the basis of my perspective.
Oh, sure. Let's not forget that you were also born into and raised in the faith as well, too, right?
Oh, well, sure. But I was also raised in the U.S. And as a U.S. citizen, I went to public school. You know, my grandparents are Christian. My mom's a convert. I've been to church more times than I can, care to remember.
Care to remember.
Look, I didn't have a great time at church, all right?
Yeah, we're all in the same boat there. Oh.
Yeah, I've been there myself. I was raised as a Jew. I was actually born to Christians, but my father's mother, who was a staunch Catholic, she didn't even know I existed until the year 2000, because they had hid the whole fact that I was even alive from her, because she, it's very, very outside marriage, sex thing, not a good thing. So I was put up for adoption, and I was raised as a Jew. So I always kind of had that question in the back of my mind, if this deity or God or Yahweh or Allah or whatever you want to call him had this great plan, and according to the Christians that I knew, that I should be following Jesus, then why would he have me be born to Christians and then be raised as a Jew who don't believe in Christ? That's kind of a crazy kind of plan, or some backwards ass way of trying to get me to get there. So that's one of the things that made me think about the whole existence of God or anything like that. So for myself anyways. And I'd had questions ever since I found that out.
Makes sense.
Do you mind if I engage with that idea for a minute, if that's not too personal?
Sure. No, not at all. Feel free.
As you know, this is one of those questions that a lot of theists and atheists come back to, like, why is life so crazy if there's a plan? And I feel like that's definitely more of a question that troubles Christians and a question that troubles Muslims, because for us, we're not, the whole point is the hereafter, right? We're judged based on the choices we make with the options that we have in front of us. If the only choice you're ever allowed to make is between killing 2 people and killing 10 people, killing 2 people would be considered a good choice in that context. It's, from our perspective, it's a very pragmatic, we're a very pragmatic religion. We're more concerned with doing your best than being perfect and being absolutely moral in all circumstances. So,
right. I was going to jump in there. Yeah. Okay. So I'm fascinated by this. Do you mind if we jump on that a little bit?
No, let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay. So my question for you, after your description of why you think Islam is the best religion and the best option for building community and family and culture, my thought was, okay, well, that all sounds very valid to you because that is your experience. But I could say that in my experience, secular humanists are the best people I've engaged with, and the ones who act the most moral in my conception, and the ones who are doing the most good for the world. And I'm not necessarily saying that, but I could. In which case it feels like we're a little bit at a stalemate, where we're both saying, well, my way is best because of what I've experienced of my way. And so my question becomes, that feels like a very pragmatic view of all of this, and it doesn't necessarily get us to truth, because we couldn't obviously come to an objective truth based on personal experiences that conflict, right? So my question is, are you concerned about the truth of this claim, of the claims that Islam makes, or are you more concerned about the pragmatic results of that faith?
So that's a really great question, first of all, and I'd like to kind of take 2 approaches to it. So the first thing that I would say is that I was having a really involved discussion about a similar topic with a close atheist friend of mine, and he mentioned that the way I describe Islam sounds an awful lot like secular humanism. So from just, that's more of a side thing. I don't think that really addresses the point that you're trying to make. And so if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that anecdote is kind of an inherently flawed way of judging the world. Am I right?
Well, it's flawed if
Ah,
the goal is to get to an objective truth. If the
that's
goal
right.
is to relate your story and your experience, then anecdote is the perfect way to do that. But in this call, I feel like what we're trying to get to is some conception of truth. And in that way, anecdote doesn't necessarily cut it. Because your anecdote could contradict my anecdote. And then we're at a stalemate.
Right. And our anecdotes are, of course, equally valid since we're both equally human. So the only, there's kind of two ways around that from there. And the first way is to have historians and philosophers and people who study these kinds of things professionally go ahead and do some kind of massive meta-analysis of these various philosophies and see, which one has done the most good for the world. And I don't think that's going to get us to the objective, true truth of how functional these things are, because, of course, each group is going to thrive under certain circumstances and fail under other circumstances. It would be a really, really huge, complicated undertaking.
Yes, it would.
I would argue that this is what, interfaith discussions have been about for the last couple hundred years, like trying to figure out who's got the most righteous approach, to put it in more religious terms.
Mm-hmm.
But then barring that, because obviously that's not possible in the limited time that we have, I would say that the objective truth matters sometimes more than other times, right? Like when you're just talking to your friend and your friend's feeling down and you're just listening. Does the objective truth of what they're saying matter as much as being supportive to them? Or, for instance, when you find yourself walking down the street, right, there's an old lady, so you help her across the street. You don't know if that old lady is secretly like, I don't know, old lady Hitler. That's the objective truth, but we can never truly know the objective truth anyway. We're always limited by hard solipsism. So you do your best with what you have, right? And I do genuinely believe that we will never have the truth. I believe that we will get very close to truth. I believe that there are tools like science and like philosophy that help us get close to the truth, and we'll be able to get much closer to the truth in 200 years than we will today. But I really don't think that our brains are capable of understanding everything,
I agree with that. Yeah, I guess my only caveat to that would be I would agree to an extent that objective truth matters more sometimes than others. And let's take your example of consoling a friend, right? If what your friend is saying is wrong and that is a threat to her soul or the threat to her ability to exist in a paradise like afterworld or potentially be I'm not sure what Sufis believe about hell or non-existence afterwards. I think that would actually be a very good time to bring up objective truth. So I agree that in certain circumstances, objective truth might not be as important as a listening ear or fanciful explorations of philosophy, but in matters of an afterlife, in matters of constructing our existence on Earth for a purpose beyond Earth, especially one that has such high stakes, I would say that objective truth is very important there. Wouldn't you agree?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. In Islam, and you guys have heard this on the news a dozen times. You've heard the word Sharia, right?
Mm-hmm.
I already know it. I'm sure some of the listeners are kind of shaking their heads right now. Look, what you hear on the news about Sharia is not what Sharia is. Sharia literally means heavenly law. It's the rules that God wrote down way up in heaven, said this is how you're supposed to lead your lives, right? Okay, this is a pretty basic concept. I think all the Abrahamic faiths have an idea of it. So the Quran, as it was handed down to Muhammad, and Muhammad's life itself, for us, these are the lenses through which we try to discover Sharia, right? We don't know it. We don't have it. God, in his infinite wisdom, decided not to give it to us and to have us figure it out on our own. So we do our best, right? And in Islam, in Islamic scholarship specifically, there's a very common saying. It at the end of every work of scholarly discourse, it always ends with Allah knows best. which means that we are trying our damnedest with what we have, but we could be wrong. And so Allah knows best is a way of saying, please forgive us for our mistakes. We're only human. We're doing our best with what you gave us. And so as Muslims, we trust that Allah is aware of our context and aware of our own flaws, and we trust that he'll judge us with those in mind.
Okay, but let's take that concept and run with that a little bit.
Sure.
The way that you describe yourself and the way that you describe your view of a religion, especially if you've talked with your atheist friends and they've described it very similarly to secular humanism, it seems to me like we would probably align on a lot of stuff. Not necessarily supernatural stuff, but, day to day, be nice to other people, respect other individuals as equally human, all of that. But there are some versions of every religion, Sharia included, that go in a very opposite direction and take the same, they have that different context, like you're saying, but they're taking the same book, the same lenses, and interpreting it in frankly, a very harmful way. So when we give this over this, okay, well, it's a religion. It's our attempt at interpreting the will of God, and we can only know as much as we can based on this lens. To me, that feels like validating a group of people who shouldn't be validated, right? So how do you get around the no true Muslim fallacy here, where your Sharia might be very secular humanist, very aligned with a lot of Western values in some sense, but also there are other people who are interpreting the same book, the same scripture, in a very harmful way, both here and elsewhere. So I guess that's where the truth claim comes in for me. That's why the truth claim is important, because if we have no other way to distinguish who is true than what their personal morality tells them, then it seems like it's kind of a free-for-all, and we don't have a valid way of saying that's wrong, you shouldn't do that.
Well, I think that's a really good point. And, of course, as a Muslim, as all Muslims in the U.S. know, this is a question we get posed a lot by the media, by strangers on the street, by close friends and family. It's a question we ask ourselves all the time, right? And what it comes down to really is, holding off on your question about what actually determines the objective truth of things, because that's a much deeper question. The way that the way that I was always taught to kind of approach it is like, look at what the Prophet ﷺ actually did, right? If these people are acting in the way that he acted, then maybe they have something about them. If they're not acting in the way that he acted, then they're probably wrong. His acts are called, the collection of his acts is called Sunnah. That's his character. And it's recorded in the form of short sayings and stories called Hadith. And so that's how we kind of filter the entire religion, right? We don't just read the Quran and say, okay, if the Quran says this, then we do that. No, we start with what would the Prophet do? And then we work backwards. So when we talk about ISIS or Al-Qaeda, for instance, these guys they're just simply not acting in the way that the Prophet would condone. We have records of him explicitly condemning the things, or things like the things that they're doing. And so that's how we know. He is kind of our objective truth, although I'm sure he's about as close to the objective truth as we have on Earth.
Well, I have a question.
Well, yeah, go for it, Neil.
I was going to ask, you were talking about ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they feel that they're the best examples of Muslims, I guess, that follow the book as well. So how do you, because I'm sure they believe that what they're doing is what is wanted, I guess, or what is expected. So how do you deal with that sort of thought? Because you obviously are a much better person than these folks that are representing that side of it. So how do you guys determine which of you is actually doing the right work, so to speak?
Well, again, we look at the Hadith, we look at the Sunnah of the Prophet, and these
That's
guys.
what they have, no?
Look, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not a scholar of Al Qaeda's philosophy or ISIS's
Sure.
philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
I'm pretty sure, and you are going to have to take this with a grain of salt. I'm pretty sure these guys are Wahhabis or Wahhabi descendants. The Wahhabis do not use the Sunnah. They are Quran literalists, and
Okay.
if Bible literalists and Quran literalists have anything in common, they're completely crazy. And
Well,
this is...
I don't want to say
This is
crazy,
one of the ways
but
that we can tell.
they've definitely been guided down a wrong path. That's for sure. Even based
No,
on
and
That's a
and I
nice
do
way
want to
of putting it.
stress that this is a thing that is consistent across religions, right? No matter what the religion is, there are going to be extremists, and there are going to be people who are more progressive, and there are going to be fundamentalists and people who, focus on certain parts and other parts. A great example of this is there are some people who tell me that Jesus is all about love and acceptance and peace. And then there are other people who point to things like, fashioning a whip and chasing people out of the temple, and saying, "I do not bring peace but a sword." And so there are ways to interpret any book based on what you're looking for. And so I guess my final thought here, and we will have to resume this later. I would love to have you call back. Is
conversation.
This again gets right down to why I think objective truth, or at least a way of fashioning, reaching objective truth in a way that can bring people who are not already sold on a preconception, is so important. So you can say the prophet is the most the closest to objective truth that we can get. And that's all well and good until you try and talk with me, who frankly has very little idea about any of that and has not yet heard a convincing argument for any kind of God as an objective source of truth. So for me, my question for next time maybe is, let's run with that. Let's run with, you make the claim that the prophet, I believe is what you called him, is the most objective source of truth to your best understanding. So maybe call in next time with some arguments for that, and see if there's a way that we can reach a common ground about why we think that is.
Also,
I
one
would
little...
love to. And I'll go ahead.
I was just going to, a little quick sort of thing. Remember as well that you've got good and bad people, no matter where they are and what their beliefs are. And it can take a bad ideology to make an otherwise good person do bad things. So, you got to keep that in mind as well. So I understand that you are probably one of the best examples of a Muslim that there are out there, because you seem like a pretty decent human being, man. So keep that up.
Thanks. That's very kind of you. Do you mind if I say something to the audience real quick?
That depends. Let's start, and we'll either let you go or we'll drop you.
Sounds good. So to everybody listening, I realize that Muslims are in the news. We've been in the news, and you hear a lot about our extremists and what these guys are not. You find extremists everywhere. They're a product of strife, and whether or not theists or theists, it's not right to discriminate against anybody, and it's best to take an approach. These guys are evil. They're doing horrible things, but the horrible things they do are things that are being done to them. They're just perpetuating a cycle of violence. So please keep that in mind. Be kind to your neighbors, and I would love to speak with y'all next week if you have me.
Yeah, definitely call back. Thank you so much.
Sad I won't be here, but it was nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you too.
Okay, so this is, I think, the primary difference between me and my approach to this, and some of the other people who are at the ACA. I much prefer this kind of conversation where we can get to know the other person really well, as much as we can in the short amount of time, and see if we can find people who are decent, honest, good people who disagree with us, and then get to the bottom of why. We could have very easily gone in for certain, very, very standard jabs at Islam, about
Sure.
Muhammad, about Muslims. And I don't want to do that because, first
No.
of all, it is perpetuating a specific kind of discrimination when all religions hold these things to be problematic, or
Yep.
hold these problematic things. But also, that wouldn't have got us to where we were, which is probably he's going to call back in next week, and probably we're
Yeah.
going to be able to continue this conversation. So
I think it's good that we talk to folks and reach each other's humanity rather than our belief systems, right? And if you got that foundation where you're talking to each other like we're two human beings or three human beings or four human beings that are sharing this planet, and we have that connection that way, and we can talk about all the stuff that's around that connection, and hopefully our conversations can go, decently. Anyways, they don't always, but I think I try, and I know that you try as well, V, to have those conversations be amicable rather than confrontational.
yes, exactly. That's my preference. And there
Yeah,
are
for
people
sure.
who do things in other ways, which are also cool.